All right, so it's a Sunday and the union budget has just been announced, and we've been tracking it really closely to tell you that it was a bit of a non event, actually. Nothing big really came out of it. And if you really want to know, I'll give you details. Now, normally, big announcements or populist announcements, things like direct transfers to people's accounts, are announced, or tax breaks are announced during an election year when there's a big election coming up. So this is not that time. We're in the middle of a term, so we don't expect that. But there were also no announcements in terms of infrastructure. And remember, just last year we got a big tax break as well in order to improve consumption. So, a couple of things though were still glaring in their absence in this budget. One, there was no mention of farmers, farm income, improving farm income, the Manrega, project, which is the scheme which is now called the VG scheme, found no mention at all. Nothing on employment. So there was some talk about skilling, but nothing on large scale employment generation, which remains a big problem in India. I found it slightly sad that there was no mention of air pollution, which all of our big cities are suffering with. No mention of urban development at all. Remember, Geeta Gopinath at Davos just said air pollution is one of India's biggest problems. There was no mention of air pollution. Big scale infrastructure spending from government. They announced 7 new high speed rail corridors and they announced 20 waterways, but nothing other than that in terms of large scale infrastructure. You'll remember, of course, earlier the rail budget was a separate budget that was announced a day before, and then there would be the main union budget. The rail budget a few years ago was merged into this budget. So, other than these high speed rail corridors, there was no mention of trains at all. Now, we understand from the papers that the FM has allocated 2.81 lakh crore to Indian Railways, and apparently it's up 10% from last year. But there was no mention of train safety. There was no mention of the Mumbai local, which comes under the rail ministry. Nothing different there. And for the average middle class salaried worker, no personal income tax cuts, like I mentioned. There are no universal cash transfers. And one of the things that economists were always worried about is that our growth or our economy is not being driven by investment, is being driven by investments from government and not by consumption from the average Indian. But at this point, even the investments from government are not happening or they have not been announced this year. There has been a big jump in defense ministry allocation for this year. There's a 21% increase in capital allocation for defense, which is at 2.19 lakh crore rupees, and the overall budget has also apparently been hiked to 7.8 lakh crore rupees. In terms of fiscal deficit and debt to GDP, they've kept their targets fairly tight and they're achieving those tight targets. The one thing we saw was a securities transaction tax on transactions on futures and options, F&O trades. And this is interesting. We've seen the stock markets reacted badly, but what's interesting about F&O trades is that, remember, SEBI not long ago told us that 90% of those who are trading in F&O are losing money. Now, what happens in securities transaction tax is that you're paying the tax on the transaction, not on the profit, which is sort of like capital gains tax you have to pay if you've made a profit. But securities transaction tax you pay on every single transaction. So whether or not you made money, you still have to pay tax at this point on F&O. And that is a really interesting thing. And I'm hoping it will make a lot of people think twice about those F&O trades, and maybe it will reduce the number of people sort of gambling and losing money. But like we've seen, the stock market has not enjoyed that announcement at all. The Sensex was down 2% when I was recording this video, and some of the analysts I heard speaking actually expected to fall further tomorrow morning as well. Remember, the FIIs are leaving our market, our stock market, and they expect that to continue because there is a general sense that there was no sort of story in this budget. It was much shorter than the budget announcements we've been used to in the last couple of years. Some of the things that were announced were actually too small to normally find mentioned in the budget speech. So there was no real, sort of a narrative or no story that they were telling us about our economy or about their plan for our economy. So it's the budget is meant to be, in the traditional sense, an announcement of the government's accounts. This is what we earned. This is what we spent. This is our plan for the year. This is what it was actually. It was nothing out of the ordinary. It was really run of the mill. And unfortunately, our stock market seems to have not been bolstered by it at all. And hopefully, it's not going to take a further beating tomorrow, but we'll keep an eye on it for you. Well, that's my take of the budget. We have another clearer sort of breakdown at 6 p.m. on our YouTube channel with economists. So tune in for that for a clearer understanding of what this budget has brought us.